Welcome to Jamie's Garage. In this video, I'm going to show you how to upgrade your oil pump in your BMW M54. Let's go. All right guys, we're going to be upgrading the engine oil pump. Right now it's in actually really good working condition. However, it is a really common failure point, and when the guys are out on the racetrack, this is the last thing you want to fail. So a few ways that it does fail. This is the original setup right here. It uses this really thin nut. It is left-hand thread, so it's a lefty tighty, righty loosey. Anyway, this nut will start to back off while it's running, and then what will happen is this gear will slide forward, push the nut completely off, and then now you have the gear spinning on the shaft. However, it's not driving the pump, and if the pump's not driving, you lose oil pressure, you can say goodbye to your engine. Another way is the factory gear has these splines, and the splines fit onto the shaft. Well, those splines will shear off, and then so again you'll start to get where this thing starts spinning and not driving the pump. The last way it fails, there's a narrow part of the shaft that is not as thick as the rest of it, and it will shear off just completely. Again, not driving the pump, and it's really bad. So we're using an Achilles, and I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that right, Achilles upgrade kit, and it addresses all of these problems. If you take a quick look at the two gears, the Achilles has like this squared gear, and the shaft is much larger, a lot more material, instead of all these little splines. And this thing is press fit. So if I were to put this on, it doesn't go on completely. It's got a slight taper to it. So once you put the bolt in, it press fits on there. There's very, very slim chance, if any, that this thing is going to back off or it's going to shear. Another thing is this bolt cannot back off because they give you this wire, and the wire goes through this little hole in the bolt, on the end of the bolt, and it wire ties to the gear itself. So that way this physically can't back off because the wire is holding it. And I believe that the material that they use is like a hardened steel or something. I'm not going to claim that officially. I don't know that for sure. But anyway, we have to rebuild the pump and install this. So we're going to do that now. First thing we're going to do is pull off the front of the pump and the housing. I removed the 5 bolts with a 10mm socket to release the front cover. Then it's just as simple as sliding out the drive gear and the ring gear. Okay, so what we have to do is the rotor is pressed onto this shaft, and we have to press the rotor off of the shaft. So we're gonna go over the press, we're gonna knock that off, but before we do that, we gotta measure how far that is. So we're going to take our dial caliper here, gonna open it up. Okay, we are going to measure the end of the rotor and the end of this flat spot of the shaft. Okay, I'm gonna lock that down. And the reason is because when we install this rotor onto the shaft, it has to be the same distance. So let's go ahead and get that done right now. No special tools needed here. I just use a 3/8 extension to drive the shaft out of the gear. I swap it out with a new shaft, and I use painter's tape as an easy way to see my stopping point. This ensures the length of the new shaft protruding from the drive gear matches exactly as before with the original shaft. So on the front of this gear is a little dimple. There's also a little dimple on here, and what that does, it indicates that that is the outside portion of the gear. That faces the front. So they are directional, apparently. All right, get that all lubricated. Shove that in there. We're going to turn it until the shaft finds the hole. There it goes. And this should be perfectly flush, and it is. Looks really good. This is a machined surface, and there is no gasket. I'm going to snug these up to about 10 Newton meters. I've done this enough times I can feel 10 Newton meters. It's not a critical torque, just as long as it's not loose or over tightened. And that feels pretty good. The oil pump gets installed towards the front of the engine right here. This is the windage tray. Basically, its job is to help calm down the splashing and aeration of oil the crankshaft would create by rotating into the oil supply. The tray is a barrier between the crankshaft and the supply of oil that's in the oil pan. Okay, these are at 23 Newton meters. Come on, there we go. Okay, just go through and verify these one more time, and I'll mark them. All right, this is our pickup tube. So I'm gonna squirt a little bit of oil in here. I can't fill it with oil because if I did do that, which is how you normally would do it, as soon as I flipped it upside down to install it, all the oil would come right back out. We'd make a giant mess. Now, if I was installing this in the car, this engine would be right side up. I would fill this thing with oil, we'd put it back in there, the oil would stay in there, we'd bolt it up, and it would be primed and ready to go. This, however, I'm building the engine, so it's upside down all the time. I can't do that. When the oil pan is in the car and they fill it with oil, it'll be completely submerged with oil. So what they're gonna have to do is pull the fuse for the fuel pump. They'll crank the engine a few times, and what they're gonna do is prime the oil. They'll loosen the oil filter housing, and they'll make sure there's oil in there. And if there is, then we know that the pump is primed and ready. They'll tighten the oil filter, they'll start the engine and make sure that that red oil can light goes off within a few seconds. If it does, then they're good. A little bit of oil on that seal. Get that in there. Another way people will prime these, they'll use engine assembly grease or petroleum jelly, and they'll put some grease in there. So what it does, it creates an automatic suction. I don't have engine assembly grease. You don't want to use wheel bearing grease or lithium grease because that will ruin the pump, and you don't want to do that. So I'd rather put it in with just the assembly lube and let them prime it. Okay, we're going to reuse the original sprocket, but I got a new chain. It's made by Iwis. Maybe that's how you pronounce it. It is a racing chain. What makes it a racing chain? I don't know. It looks identical to the old one for the except that it's new. I don't know. I don't know what makes it a racing chain. I don't know if they use better materials, maybe better rollers. I don't know. But the way I like to do this, get that on there. Now this is keyed. If you guys remember, there's an F on the front of it stamped. So I got to make sure that we are lined up here, and it's going to be a lot easier to rotate the pump than it is for me to rotate the engine. I'm like one tooth off, so let's try this. Oh, there we go, we're almost there, almost perfect. This new chain is a little tight, so I use a screwdriver as leverage to slip the gear into place, give it a couple tap-tap-aroos, and when I tighten the fastener, the gear will be fully seated onto the shaft. Okay, now if you remember, this is left-handed thread. We're gonna use some blue Loctite. I just naturally want to I just want to turn it right. It's so unnatural to turn it left to tighten it. Try to keep the engine from rotating here. Here we go. Negative 22 newton meters. All right, we're going to be installing the safety wire now. This is a left-handed bolt, so that means, like we talked about, I've probably said it 3 times already in this video, but basically you got to turn it left to tighten it. So if I wanted to loosen this, I'd have to turn it right. We don't want this bolt turning this direction, so we're going to put the safety wire in. They give you these little tiny holes, and then we're going to pull the wire the same direction as if you were to tighten this, which would be left. And then we're going to tie it off to the sprocket. So what you want to do is feed the wire through this little hole here. All right, we're going to pull this through until it's about halfway. Cinch that down. Now we're going to be tying it off between these 2 holes in the sprocket. Squeeze that down, going to lock the pliers. And then we're going to pull. Actually, I don't like how that looks, so let's give it a little. There we go. That's a much better looking safety wire there. Go ahead and release these. Put a little hook. We're going to swing it on in like that. Let's grab it with our pliers here. Drag that through. A little bit more. That looks pretty good right there. Okay, trim off the end. And we'll roll this sucker in like this. And we're done. The oil pump upgrade that I did in this video is actually used for an M54 that I built for ChrisFix. If you guys want to check out that video, I'll put a link at the end. Thanks for watching.